Hey everybody, how you doing? Mike Kriak, Managing Operating Partner at Consensus Mesh. I'm actually going to be joined by Ajit, actually I think on the screen here. So Ajit, are you out there? Can we, I don't think we can hear you.
Let me just see if I can. Hold on. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's great. Fantastic. Well, I think we'll dive right in. Ajit, it's great to see you. And we both had worked at Consensus for some time, so it's really great. So fantastic. I'll let you take it from there, and then I think we've got a couple questions, but hand it over to you.
Yeah, very nice to meet you again. And Consensus alumni are everywhere, as you're aware, in Web3. So today, I'm probably one of the least technical people at Aave now. So I'll try and cover some of the topics. I can't, unfortunately, just yet talk about everything that we are building because we're building a lot of different things. But I'll focus on two major things we're doing that have, I think, got a lot of attention and that are also imminent. So I'll talk about what we're doing in terms of building a cross-chain DeFi protocol, and this is in the public domain. Then I'll talk about the permission DeFi idea with Aave. So thank you so much for inviting us, and I'm quite enamored of interactive discussions. So it's been a very long time since I made people sit through my PowerPoints, but I'll try my best. So Aave, as you're aware, has now, as of today, after the correction, has 23.5 odd billion in liquidity. We've grown quite significantly since I joined. It was 2.7 billion or less in liquidity. Now we are looking at, we have hit 26, 27 billion on some of the days. And the design of Aave is flexible in that it accommodates multiple liquidity pools, right? It's not monolithic, it's flexible. And that leads to quite a few interesting consequences. So one thing, when BSC was essentially attracting a lot of users and away from Ethereum, and partly because interacting with smart contracts on Ethereum was really expensive back in March, we decided as a community to deploy Aave on Polygon, which is an Ethereum side chain, and at the peak, the liquidity there was approximately 8 billion. But what was really interesting about Polygon is that it brought a lot of users, right? So Polygon, because the users were suddenly paying fractions of a cent instead of paying $70 for some of the deposits and withdrawals. So that brought a lot of users, which kind of reaffirmed our conviction that DeFi is for everyone. So Polygon and the scaling solutions and different layer ones in the future will potentially create some very interesting opportunities and trade-offs. So Aave has continued to grow on both Polygon and Ethereum layer one. And it's so just to take a recap, Aave is a very simple idea, but a very powerful idea. And it's the idea is that users that have excess liquidity in any crypto asset might want to earn a yield on it, and people who have the need for leverage or don't want to sell but borrow against their assets can do so from a DeFi protocol. So Aave is fully automated and transparent, and it's mutualized. So that's led to loans don't need to be borrowers don't need to be individually matched, which has led to very rapid scaling. And even though the underlying Ethereum network has its moment, it's a shared resource, it's a common resource. And some days people are minting a lot of NFTs on it. Some days there is extraordinary amounts of transaction volume on Uniswap, or especially AMMs. So that leads to a lot of fluctuation in gas fees and user experience. But Aave has been incredibly resilient, and that's partly because of all the stress testing work that's been done around liquidations. Liquidation is the idea that if somebody's borrow position becomes under collateralized, then market participants can essentially liquidate their collateral, essentially buy it off at a discount. And that's So far, based on all of the risk parameters, stress testing, ongoing improvement by the community, Aave has been very resilient in 40-50% drops on the 19th of May and so on, and also in sustained drops. Aave has remained very resilient, which is really a positive sign. And when we spoke at the Bank of England last month about DeFi and Aave, one of the things that we really highlighted was this idea of systemic resilience. Anyways, moving on. So Aave is governed by 70,000 plus token holders. A DeFi, anything is only decentralized if it's not controlled by one individual or a small number of individuals or one entity or shared set of interests. In the sense that vested interest. So Aave is governed by 70,000 plus token holders, and that number is growing. Every single decision with regards to the core DeFi protocol, including listing of assets, now going forward, risk parameters, grants, more and more software development on the protocol is being done in a decentralized manner. So the decentralization roadmap for Aave is incredibly, progressing incredibly well. And Aave also has a first loss cover feature, which is the safety module where users can stake their Aave tokens, and then those Aave tokens, 30% of that value provides a first loss cover on their deposits, because there's always a long tail risk associated with smart contracts, no matter how secure the protocol is, and staking mechanism secures that risk. So metrics, TVL is not the best metric for a liquidity protocol like Aave. We much prefer the liquidity, the total deposits and borrows and transaction, fees. So borrowing volume has been growing. It's grown to 8 billion, 11 billion plus in total value logged. On Aave, 8 billion was the peak market size, and then then Ethereum got cheaper, by the way, because of layer 2s. A lot of protocols moved to Polygon, and some of that liquidity moved back to Aave v2. So this is another point that kind of gave us conviction that the world is going to be cross-chain, and then users need to be able to make their own trade-offs based on so Aave can be deployed on multiple layer 1s, layer 2s, and users can choose the trade-offs they want. And so we are kind of progressing on that roadmap as a community quite quickly. So, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, if the slides are not coming through, I know you were just about to show some metrics. So I don't know, as you're sharing your screen there, if that was flipping through, if you had, because I know you were doing a great job with the introduction there. Perfect. Okay, that's great. So we can see them moving now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So yeah, so some of these slides are untold. My apologies for that. So borrowing volume, it's a completely automated system. So unlike some of the CeFi crypto financial institutions and all of that, so Aave is not 4 guys sitting on a trading floor or anything. It's a completely automated software. It's a set of smart contracts deployed and governed by a DAO. So that's kind of what makes it. That's why we can make an honest claim about Aave being a truly decentralized protocol. So that means the metrics vary with the market. So when there is quite a bit of demand for leverage, and there is kind of trending markets, then the borrowing volume grows quite quickly, and that's perfectly fine, right? So gross value logged, again, depending on market conditions, overall market prices, and some of this actually reflects the underlying crypto prices as well, because when crypto prices are going up, then the TVL figure and all of the other figures tend to do well. But I think what's far more interesting is the transaction volume and transaction numbers, and borrowing volume in particular, and that's quite healthy. Then the fees, I don't have the chart here, but the fees have varied from between 3 and 10 million. So now what's on the cross-chain roadmap? We are looking at pretty much everything that's EVM compatible, right? So to the point of the previous session, Ethereum virtual machine has emerged as a de facto standard, right? And that's partly because of all the work Consensus and other folks did on tooling and software, development tools and deployment tools, MetaMask, Infura, but also VS Code and all of the plugins. So EVM has emerged as a standard, and I'm not saying that will always be the case. I think there's lots of good stuff going on Rust-based smart contracting platforms. But there is, when you look at the maturity of tools and the capability of developers to be able to secure DeFi protocols on a relatively robust framework, then we are sort of currently sticking to EVM compatible solutions. And we looked at Avalanche. So one of the things we really like to do before we deploy is we want to know everything that can go wrong, right? It's not just about identifying what's right with the layer 1 or layer 2. It's also making sure that we know what the potential security issues are, and therefore we are able to build software in a way that kind of acknowledges and it manages those issues. So Avalanche has a strong consensus mechanism. It's EVM compatible. I haven't seen the latest metrics, but the the promised transactions per second are pretty good. Proof of stake, it's like Polygon, but it's an independent chain, and it's a little bit more secure than some of the Ethereum side chains in terms of the upgradability and other aspects. So so we're going to deploy an Avalanche at some point. Stanley has spoken about it. Then optimistic rollups are quite a bit further ahead in terms of maturity than ZK rollups. So we are currently building on Optimism, and it's still currently experimental. Optimism now promises zero code change deployment of existing smart contracts. It's innovative, uses L1 security, has gas limitations on transactions due to the execution of fraud proofs, as you're aware. So this is optimistic rollups are also, I think it's relatively in the early days, but we are currently building and testing quite aggressively on both Optimism and Arbitrum. But Avalanche is definitely more ready at this point than some of the rollups. So Arbitrum also uses L1 security, works in the same way as Optimism, but fraud proofs are more gas efficient, which makes it kind of a little bit more attractive, if you will, at this point. And but what's really important is that if we make a code change to any of the the core contracts, then all of that stuff needs to get re-audited by more than 2 auditors, and auditors are very hard to find these days. There's an incredible amount of demand for smart contract auditors. So we never deploy in a rush, right? Because Aave now is incredibly successful. There is a lot of value on it. So we're not we have to move fast without breaking things, and that's always a big challenge for the dev team. So where could we go next? Solana Neon is very interesting. I mean, Solana has had some recent reboot issues, and it could still do with a bit more testing and resilience, but we are quite excited about some of the trade-offs that Solana makes. But it's still very, very early. Neon is not yet ready. Solana still has work to do on resilience. But thing is, we are looking at Moonbeam, Akala network, Akala in particular, because it's the home of DeFi on Polkadot. I mean, Harmony have an inbound governance proposal on the Aave protocol. So there's going to be more and more of EVM compatible chains that want to deploy Aave one way or the other, or layer 2s. Now the question is, this creates fragmentation of liquidity. So and fragmented liquidity is less efficient. It's just less efficient use of capital than one large liquidity pool. So while this type of architecture gives us a lot of flexibility in the sense that the market can decide, we don't have to decide which layer 1 or layer 2 is the winner. We don't have to, make a priori calls on. So we are engineers, we build software, and we let the market decide as long as we can deploy in a secure way. But that creates interesting challenges. Now, how do we, create capital efficiency if we end up with 10 liquidity pools which have 2 billion each, as opposed to one very large liquidity pool with relatively stable interest rate curves and so on and so forth. So this leads to the problem of cross-chain composability. Protocols across chains aren't necessarily compatible. We don't exist in isolation as a protocol. So Aave benefits from being part of a flourishing ecosystem with lots of different and exciting DeFi protocols, Uniswap, Maker, all of the others, and some of the innovations that are coming on top of Aave as well. So I think this composability, breaking composability is limiting for DeFi protocols, and it has an impact. So we're trying to solve for cross-chain compatibility. The first step is to, one of the things we don't want to do is we don't want to create native tokens because it fragments governance. Token holder governance is imperfect, but it's the best system that we know so far. So if there are lots of different tokens on lots of different blockchains, that first of all fragments liquidity, and it's very, very hard to for the community to know what's exactly going on. So what we're doing is we are creating cross-chain governance, and the idea is that using the same set of Aave tokens, Aave governance will be able to use you will be able to govern all of the liquidity pools on different protocols. There's quite a bit of engineering in there that I'm not fully up to speed with, but having shared governance across multiple Aave deployments is very powerful and very valuable. Because it sort of aligns, incentives for all the token holders as opposed to fragmenting them. Oh, I'm on Polygon, so I'll do what's in the best interest of Polygon. Nope, you as a token holder, what's in your best interest is to do what's in the best interest of the protocol. So now of the Aave protocol, right? Yep. So now next steps.
One item too. Yeah, just I know we've got about 5 minutes here. I want to make sure we get into some of the questions that were asked and raised.
Questions.
So I know if you've had those as well. Clearly, layer 2 summer for you. So maybe switching gears a little bit. I know there's been some conversations about KYC and utilizations of decentralized social networks, and you possibly launching a social network to be able to help with the reputation and credibility of individuals that utilize Aave. Do you have any updates for us on that?
Yeah, so I can't tell you right now. We are, it's still we are sort of exploring lots of different ideas. So it's very difficult for me to say something very specific and beyond what Stani has already tweeted about. So everything you said is right, but the key idea is that users should be able to own their social graph. I think that's the key hypothesis we are working with. So because in Web 2, people create your Facebook knows about your social graph based on your data, right? And that's probably not the optimal scenario from a user perspective, as opposed to users kind of being able to determine, and not just by adding friends or deleting friends, but by actually sort of having more ownership of their actual social graph. Now, what does that mean in practice is something I think we're experimenting with very closely, but that's where the Aave social media effort will differ from everything you've seen before.
Yeah, that's really great. I appreciate that. I mean, it is interesting. I know when you guys had launched some of your permission pools, there were concerns about KYC, AML implementation in relation to institutions and ARC. Would love to, maybe you can give a little bit of comment on that as well, on how you balance that by providing what the market wants and or needs with some of the core tenets of DeFi.
Yeah, so I think on the DeFi front, so some of the stuff, so there is a clear distinction between what the Aave protocol does and what the Aave company does, right? So Aave now, so some of the social media R&D, some of the work and build out on that front is the Aave company's work, whereas the DeFi protocol is entirely managed by DeFi, the Aave governance. So what does that mean in practice? Is that when you deploy a permission pool, then that's not something the Aave team does. That's something the governance will be able to decide. So now, one of the things we have seen is in the community, initially there was this knee-jerk reaction about, oh, DeFi is no, there should be no KYC on DeFi. But I think over the last 6 months, what we have seen is the community has become far more acknowledging and I think willing to appreciate the requirements of lots of different users, who are not going to be able to access DeFi directly. I mean, there are lots of ordinary noobs, users, grandma, that need a far more convenient interface to access DeFi. And now we have people, we have DeFi protocols, the same DeFi protocols that talk about why there should be no KYC are actually creating a very banking-like interface. So we're not doing any of that. What we're doing is we are asking institutions to engage in all the innovation that's happening in the Aave community, right? Use Aave protocol directly in the same way that everyone else does. But if the only way they can do that and enable access to DeFi for everyone in the world is by essentially, in a permission way, and by essentially, being KYC'd by an intermediary. If that's what the requirements are, then that they have that option. So again, we don't decide on behalf of the market. It's the market decides, and we don't decide on behalf of the community. The community makes those decisions, and you will see a governance proposal like, Centrifuge has a permission market governance proposal right now, and the governance will vote on it and make that decision.
Yeah. I know, just one last question, just in relation to governance, which we see here in cross-chain governance, certainly important and valuable to consider. When you look at DAOs and DAO tooling beyond voting, what else do you think needs to happen? What tooling, what ways of coordination do you think could benefit your community the most? And what would you like to see built in terms of DAO tooling standards, DAO tooling platforms that could help with your community?
Yeah, so I think in terms of Aave, right? So there is already quite a bit of work that's going on through the grants DAO. We've seen projects like Mirror, snapshots are very widely used. So on the basic technology, we're looking at gasless governance with a team called Biconomy, who are currently already building something. So there are connects. There are lots of different people working with cross-chain bridges on Aave. So it's not up to us to, again, the community picks the best solution. Now, I think what's missing from all of the DAO tooling is sort of built-in legal support, right? So the people are creating lots of different DAOs, and it's usually 5 guys buying a sports team or a JPEG, or or NFT or whatnot. I think what's missing in all of that is the underlying legal framework that folks at Open Law at Consensus were working on, which is how do we make sure that any DAO is robust from a legal standpoint, and the liabilities are well understood. There is limited liability for all of the partners. So I think some of the DAOs can be so much more powerful across the space if there is kind of firm legal basis for a DAO, and not everyone has to hire a lawyer before creating a DAO. They can essentially work on well understood existing frameworks so that code and law work together. So I think in my mind, having the robust legal tooling for DAOs is going to become increasingly important as we see more and more DAOs evolve into do things like private equity, do things like NFT purchases, and so on and so forth.
That's great. I know.
And operating DeFi protocols, yeah.
Yeah, I know. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Maybe I'll ask you to maybe tweet out the last question on staking of NFTs as collateral. I think a lot of people would love to be able to look and develop on that within DeFi and how that ecosystem is going to grow. So maybe I'd ask you to tweet out some of your thoughts on that front. But I know, unfortunately, we're out of time. Ajit, thank you so much for taking the time for the update.
No. Thank you so much. So I was a bit slower, but it's really enjoyed your questions. Thank you so much. Been a pleasure.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
Yeah.